3 days after we moved into our new house, the previous owner called me. She said she forgot to disconnect a hidden security camera in the living room. She told me she just saw my husband and his mother on the feed, but they were not alone. She warned me not to tell him and to come to her immediately. The phone almost slipped from my hand. My name is Paige, 33 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant for a top-tier firm in Chicago. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your trust completely shattered by the people you called family. I was sitting at my sleek glass desk on a typical Tuesday afternoon, buried under a mountain of corporate tax records. My job is to hunt for hidden assets in massive fraud cases. I spend my days tracking offshore accounts, finding missing commas in spreadsheets that lead to millions of dollars, and exposing liars. My phone vibrated against the desk, shattering my intense concentration. The caller ID showed the name of Mrs. Higgins, the sweet 72-year-old widow who had sold Bradley and me our beautiful new house in the suburbs just 3 days prior. I answered the call warmly, assuming she simply had a minor question about her mail forwarding or a forgotten utility bill. Instead, her voice trembled with raw urgency. She told me to drop everything I was doing and come to her assisted living facility right away. She was completely breathless, repeating over and over that I needed to see something with my own eyes. I grabbed my long wool coat and drove quickly across town, my mind racing with terrifying possibilities. Bradley. My husband of 4 years was supposed to be working from home today. He was a sales director, exceptionally charismatic and endlessly charming, the exact kind of man who could talk his way out of a speeding ticket with a brilliant smile. I thought perhaps there had been a break-in or a fire. When I arrived at the nursing home, Mrs. Higgins was pacing in the lobby, clutching an iPad tightly to her chest. Her eyes were wide with genuine pity, the kind of look reserved for someone who just lost a loved one. She guided me to a quiet corner by the large bay window, her frail hands shaking violently as she unlocked the tablet screen. She quickly explained that her son had installed a discreet, high-definition camera on the living room bookshelf a year ago to monitor her safety after her husband passed away. They had simply forgotten to take the device down during the chaotic moving process. She opened the security application and pressed play. The crisp color video showed the spacious living room of the house I had just drained my entire life savings to purchase. The bright afternoon sunlight poured in through the tall bay windows, perfectly illuminating the expensive cream-colored sofa I had proudly picked out just last month. But the pristine, joyful scene of my new home was entirely ruined by what was happening on those cushions. Bradley was there aggressively kissing a woman. Not just any random woman, it was Rebecca. She was his ex-girlfriend, a woman he repeatedly swore he had not spoken to in nearly a decade. My heart slammed violently against my ribs. I felt a cold, sickening sweat break out across my neck. They were entirely comfortable treating my hard-earned sanctuary like their personal playground. But the most horrifying part of the video was not the affair itself. It was the third person sitting in the room. Sitting in the matching armchair directly across from them, casually sipping from one of my favorite porcelain teacups, was Beatrice, my 62-year-old mother-in-law. She was not shocked. She was not looking away in utter disgust. She was actually smiling. Beatrice had always been a toxic elitist, a bitter woman who wore her artificial high society status like a weapon. She had made it painfully clear from the very day we met that I was not good enough for her perfect son. I watched in absolute revulsion as Beatrice reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a set of shiny new house keys, and tossed them directly to Rebecca. The hidden camera had a built-in microphone, and the audio was crystal clear. "Make yourself at home, Rebecca." Beatrice sneered, her venomous voice echoing loudly from the tiny iPad speakers. "Paige will be too busy grinding at the accounting firm to pay the mortgage. She is nothing but a walking ATM for my son anyway." Rebecca caught the keys gracefully and laughed, leaning her head back against Bradley's chest. Bradley chuckled softly and kissed Rebecca's forehead completely, validating his mother's toxic cruelty without a single ounce of hesitation. I stood frozen in this quiet lobby of the nursing home. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal threatened to crush the breath right out of my lungs. Beatrice had always despised me, but I never imagined she would actively orchestrate an affair and hand over the keys to my sanctuary. I had worked grueling 70-hour weeks to secure the massive down payment for that house. I meticulously audited other people's complicated finances for a living, yet I had been completely blind to the massive emotional fraud happening inside my own marriage. Bradley was not a loving partner. He was a selfish parasite, and his mother was the mastermind eagerly directing the feast. Mrs. Higgins gently touched my arm, her eyes full of sorrow. She offered to call the police to delete the application, anything to help me. I asked her to send me the video file immediately. She complied without a single question. I watched the blue progress bar as the damning evidence transferred securely to my phone. A forensic accountant does not panic when they uncover fraud. We build an airtight case. We follow the money. We gather the evidence until the trap is inescapable. I thanked Mrs. Higgins, my voice hollow but entirely steady, and turned to leave. I walked out of the nursing home and sat inside my car. I gripped the leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned completely white. The intense nausea twisted in my stomach, a violent physical reaction to the sheer deception I had just witnessed. Just as I squeezed my eyes shut to block out the vile image of them on my sofa, my phone buzzed brightly in the cup holder. The screen lit up with a text message from Bradley. "Miss you, honey. I cannot wait for my beautiful wife to get home." The drive back to the suburbs was a blur of meticulously constructed calm. Every breath I took was calculated, every movement measured. I pulled into the driveway of our new 4-bedroom colonial, a house I had financed almost entirely with my own bonuses. The front door opened before I even reached the porch, and there was Bradley, wearing a perfectly crisp button-down shirt and a practiced, loving smile. He looked exactly like the man I had married 4 years ago, charming, attentive, and utterly flawless. "Hey, beautiful," he said, pulling me into a warm embrace. "I missed you today. Working from home is exhausting without you here to distract me." He handed me a glass of expensive red wine, the very bottle I had been saving for a special occasion. I took the glass, feeling the cool crystal against my suddenly clammy fingers. "Is that right?" I asked. My voice steady though, a violent storm raged just beneath the surface. "I am sure you found ways to keep yourself occupied." Bradley chuckled smoothly, completely oblivious to the double meaning. "Just endless Zoom calls and spreadsheets, babe. I ordered Thai food from that place you like. I figured you would be tired after hunting down tax evaders all day." Before I could formulate a response that didn't involve throwing the wine in his face, the sharp sound of a key turning in the front door echoed through the hallway. The door swung open, hitting the wall with a dull thud. Beatrice marched in carrying a small, overflowing shopping bag from a discount grocery store. She did not bother to knock, let alone wait for an invitation. She immediately dropped the bag on the pristine kitchen island I had spent months choosing. The smell of cheap garlic and old onions permeated the room. "I thought I told you to change the locks," Beatrice announced loudly, not even glancing in my direction. "Anyone could just walk right into this neighborhood." I forced a smile, my jaw aching from the effort. "Hello, Beatrice. We did change the locks. You just demanded a key on Tuesday." Beatrice finally turned her sharp, critical gaze toward me. Her eyes immediately landed on the Thai takeout containers Bradley had set on the counter. She scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound that I had learned to dread. "Takeout again, Paige?" she asked, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "I do not understand how you expect my son to perform well at his job when he is not getting proper nutrition." I managed a household, raised 2 children, and always had a hot roast on the table by 6. A wife's first duty is to her husband's health, not her corporate ladder. Bradley, who had just claimed he ordered the food as a favor to me, stood silently by the refrigerator, carefully examining a spot on the stainless steel door. He offered no defense, no correction. He simply let his mother rewrite reality to suit her narrative. "I am sorry, Beatrice," I replied, maintaining a perfectly sweet tone. "It has been a very long day at the firm. I promise to do better tomorrow. Beatrice sniffed, clearly unsatisfied by my lack of resistance. See that you do. Bradley works too hard to be treated like an afterthought in his own home. I excused myself, claiming I needed to change out of my work clothes. I practically ran up the stairs, locking the master bathroom door behind me. I turned on the faucet, letting the icy water run over my trembling hands. I splashed my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were wide, a stark contrast to the composed mask I had worn downstairs. I thought about the video. The way Beatrice had tossed the keys to Rebecca, the way she had mocked my long hours, the way she viewed me as nothing more than a financial resource to be drained. And Bradley, my husband who had kissed another woman on the sofa, I bought, then smiled in my face and complained about his exhausting day. They were not just cheating on me, they were actively managing me. They were keeping me docile, guilty, and continually striving for their impossible approval, all while they secretly gorged themselves on the fruits of my labor. I took a deep breath, drying my face with a soft towel. I would not give them the satisfaction of a hysterical breakdown. I was a forensic accountant. I dismantled complex corporate fraud rings for breakfast. This domestic deception was amateur hour by comparison. I returned downstairs, my composure fully restored. The rest of the evening was a masterclass in psychological endurance. I listened as Beatrice criticized the placement of my furniture, subtly implying that Rebecca had much better taste in interior design. I smiled as Bradley massaged my shoulders, whispering sweet nothings about our future together. I played the role of the devoted, slightly inadequate wife to perfection. Later that night, the house was finally silent. Bradley was deeply asleep, his steady, rhythmic snoring filling the master bedroom. I slipped out of bed, moving with practiced silence, and grabbed my laptop from my work bag. I retreated to my home office, a small, secure room at the end of the hall, and locked the door. The glow of my laptop screen cut through the darkness of my home office. I pulled up my professional auditing software, the exact program I used to dismantle embezzlement rings. Bradley thought he was clever, using synchronized cloud storage for all his devices, unaware that his digital footprint left a glaringly obvious trail. I bypassed his basic security questions in less than 2 minutes. His passwords were a predictable combination of his birth year and his college fraternity. I dove into his financial folders. At first glance, everything looked perfectly normal. Utility bills, car payments, generic credit card statements. But a forensic accountant never trusts the surface level. I ran a cross-referencing algorithm against our joint tax filings and his personal bank routing numbers. A hidden folder emerged, buried beneath innocuous marketing presentations. I opened it and my blood turned to absolute ice. Bradley had forged my digital signature. Just 2 weeks ago, while I was buried in quarter-end reports at the firm, he had taken out a massive $150,000 personal loan. He leveraged the equity of our brand new house, the house I primarily paid for, as collateral. He gambled my financial security to fund his secret life. I tracked the disbursement of the funds. The money had not stayed in his personal account for more than an hour. He immediately wired the entire $150,000 to an LLC registered in Delaware. The company name was completely generic, Apex Consulting Holdings, but it was essentially a digital ghost town. It had no operational history, no public executives, and no legitimate business footprint. It was a shell company to hide stolen assets. I sat there in the dark, the sickening reality washing over me. Bradley was not just a cheating husband. He was actively draining our marital assets to build a secret nest egg, likely for his future with Rebecca. He used my excellent credit score and relentless work ethic to finance betrayal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I prepared to dig into the Delaware LLC registry. Suddenly, the glare of the overhead light flooded the room. I snapped my head around. Bradley stood in the doorway, squinting against the sudden brightness. He was wearing gray sweatpants, his chest bare, his expression a tight mask of suspicion. "What are you doing up at 3 in the morning?" he demanded, his voice carrying a sharp edge of accusation. He took a step into the office, his eyes darting toward my laptop screen. I did not flinch. I did not scramble to close the window or slam the laptop shut. Doing so would instantly signal guilt. Instead, with a calm, deliberate keystroke, I swept the hidden financial documents into a background tab and pulled up a massive spreadsheet from an actual corporate case I was managing at the firm. I turned to face him, leaning back in my desk chair with a perfectly exhausted sigh. "Just an emergency audit for a corporate fraud case," I said smoothly, my tone laced with professional annoyance. "My firm caught a major discrepancy late this afternoon, and the client needs answers before the markets open tomorrow. Some absolute idiot thought he could hide stolen money from me by filtering it through a series of shell companies. It is honestly pathetic how sloppy these guys get when they think no one is watching." I watched Bradley very closely as I spoke the words. I saw the exact moment the blood drained from his face. His posture went completely rigid. His Adam's apple bobbed as he visibly swallowed hard, a textbook physiological response to sudden paralyzing fear. He shifted his weight nervously from foot to foot, suddenly looking like a trapped animal rather than the confident man parading around my kitchen hours earlier. "Wow." He managed to croak out, his voice noticeably higher than usual. "That sounds incredibly stressful, babe. You really should not push yourself so hard. They do not pay you enough to lose sleep over someone else's money." I offered him a perfectly sweet, unwavering smile. "Oh, I do not mind the lack of sleep, Bradley. I love my job. There is nothing more satisfying than watching a liar realize they have left a paper trail right to their own front door. They always think they are the smartest person in the room until I freeze their accounts." Bradley broke eye contact instantly. He mumbled something about needing a glass of water and practically fled down the hallway, leaving me alone in the office. I turned back to my screen, a cold fire burning in my chest. The game had officially changed. The next morning, the tension in the kitchen was thick enough to cut with a knife. I stood by the coffee maker, projecting total confidence. Bradley sat at the kitchen island, staring blankly into his cereal bowl, jumping slightly every time my phone buzzed with a work email. He looked completely exhausted, having spent the entire night wrestling with guilt. Before either spoke, the front door swung open. Beatrice marched into the house, her heels clicking loudly. She carried glossy invitations, her face lit up with a triumphant, predatory smile. "Good morning," she announced, completely ignoring me and walking straight to Bradley to kiss his cheek. "I have incredible news. I have taken the liberty of organizing a grand housewarming party for this coming Saturday." I gripped my coffee mug. "Beatrice, I have a massive workload this weekend. I cannot possibly host a party on such short notice." Beatrice waved her hand dismissively, turning her sharp gaze toward me. "You do not have to do a single thing, Paige. Just show up and smile. I have already arranged the catering decorations and guest list. I even invited a very special old friend of the family to join us. Someone Bradley has not seen in a long time. She is going to be absolutely thrilled to see how well my son is doing." Saturday arrived with the smell of floral arrangements and Beatrice's perfume. My house, the one I poured my blood and savings into, was filled with Bradley's family coworkers and Beatrice's high society friends. I wore a navy dress and a carefully crafted smile, balancing a silver tray of champagne. I moved through the crowded living room, playing the gracious host while silently cataloging every face, every whisper, every lie. The doorbell rang. Beatrice rushed past me, practically shoving me into a fern to reach the door first. She swung it open, and there stood Rebecca in a stunning crimson dress that clung to her perfectly, holding a bottle of expensive wine. Rebecca stepped into my foyer, her eyes sweeping over the architecture. Beatrice pulled her into a dramatic hug, squealing about how wonderful it was to see an old friend. Bradley, standing by the fireplace, suddenly stood straighter. His eyes locked onto Rebecca, a hungry familiarity flashing across his face, before he masked it with a polite nod. I gripped the silver tray tighter, the cool metal grounding me. Rebecca strutted into the living room, her heels clicking against my hardwood floors. She paraded through it. She ran her manicured fingers over the silk curtains, picked up a crystal vase I bought in Italy, and gracefully sank into the center of the cream-colored sofa, where I had watched her sleep with my husband. It was truly agonizing. "Oh, Bradley." Rebecca sighed, running a hand along the sofa cushion. "The house is gorgeous, but it feels a little cold. Do you not think it needs a woman's touch to make it a real home?" Beatrice materialized beside her instantly. She laughed loudly, drawing the attention of nearby guests. "You are right, Rebecca. Unfortunately, Paige is too obsessed with crunching numbers at her firm to understand the art of homemaking. We are lucky she even remembered to hire a caterer. I miss the days when you used to bake cherry pies from scratch for Bradley. A man needs a wife who nurtures him, not a roommate who pays half the bills." The guests exchanged pitying glances. A few of Beatrice's friends snickered softly, sipping champagne. The sheer audacity of the insult was designed to break me to provoke a hysterical reaction that would prove how unstable I was. They wanted me to scream. They wanted me to throw a fit so Bradley could play the victim of a crazy wife. Instead, I executed my role flawlessly. I lowered my eyes, adopting the posture of a submissive daughter-in-law. I offered an apologetic smile that conveyed total defeat. "You are right, Beatrice," I said softly. "I have been neglecting my domestic duties lately. I am just so grateful Bradley has a mother like you to look out for him. Let me fetch some fresh appetizers for everyone. Rebecca, please enjoy the wine." Bradley shot me a look of pure relief, clearly thrilled that I absorbed the humiliation without causing a scene that might embarrass him. I turned on my heel and walked calmly toward the kitchen, leaving the vipers to their venom. The kitchen was a sanctuary of stainless steel and marble, temporarily empty as the catering staff stepped out. I set the silver tray on the counter and took a steadying breath. I did not shed a tear. I reached down to the hem of my dress and retrieved a device I had taped to my thigh earlier. It was a voice-activated micro-audio recorder, the model our corporate security team used to monitor restricted conference rooms. I walked to the marble island in the center of the kitchen. Beatrice and Rebecca always congregated here when they thought they were alone, gossiping while criticizing my culinary skills. I crouched down, pretending to inspect a smudge on the white cabinets, and pressed the adhesive back of the recorder firmly under the lip of the overhang. It was positioned to capture every whispered secret, every malicious plot, every financial confession they dared to utter in my home. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and picked up a fresh tray of bruschetta. The trap was set. Now I just needed to let them talk. The air inside the house was growing thick with fake pleasantries. I needed oxygen before I suffocated on the hypocrisy. I slipped through the sliding glass doors and stepped out onto the back balcony. The cool evening breeze hit my face, providing a momentary relief. The balcony was cast in deep shadows, lit only by the ambient glow spilling from the living room windows. I thought I was completely alone, ready to drop my facade. But then I heard a sharp, ragged breath coming from the corner. I turned my head. Standing in the darkest section of the balcony was my brother-in-law, Trey. He was Monica's husband, a brilliant architect who always remained a quiet, steady presence at these family gatherings. But right now, Trey did not look quiet. He looked like a man standing on the edge of extreme violence. He was staring down at a piece of paper in his hands. It was a bank statement printed and crumpled as if he had crushed it in his fist before forcing himself to smooth it back out. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle twitched. His dark eyes were fixed on the numbers, burning with a pure rage that I recognized instantly. It was the same rage I felt when I hacked into Bradley's hidden accounts. "Trey," I whispered, stepping into the shadows. "Are you okay?" He snapped his head up, completely startled by my voice. He tried to shove the crumpled bank paper into his jacket pocket, but he was shaking far too badly. The paper slipped from his fingers and fluttered onto the wooden deck between us. I looked down. I could clearly see the bright red text of a massive $50,000 withdrawal. Trey looked at me, his chest heaving, the mask of the polite son-in-law completely shattered. Trey let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like a growl. He told me he did not authorize the transfer. He said he had been saving that money for 3 years to hire 2 junior architects and finally expand his business. He checked the account this afternoon to pay his quarterly taxes and found it completely empty. I felt a cold chill wash over me as the realization hit. I asked him who had access to that specific account. He closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the brick wall. He said Monica was the only other person on the mandate. His wife had gone to the bank in person. She used her status as his spouse and co-signer to bypass standard security checks. but the account required dual authorization for transfers over $10,000. Trey looked at me with an expression of absolute defeat. He said she forged his signature on the wire transfer forms. His own wife committed federal wire fraud to bypass him. When he confronted Monica over the phone an hour ago, she did not apologize. She told him it was for an urgent family investment and that Beatrice had explicitly instructed her to do it. Monica claimed the money would be returned with interest and called Trey selfish for wanting to hoard his profits while her family needed cash. Trey gripped the balcony railing so tightly, the wood groaned under the pressure. He kept his voice to a harsh whisper as he finally let out years of built-up frustration. He told me he was suffocating in this marriage. He talked about how Monica refused to work and spent her days shopping with Beatrice while he worked 80-hour weeks to keep them afloat. But the financial drain was only half the problem. He looked me straight in the eyes and talked about the constant disrespect he endured behind closed doors. He said Beatrice and the rest of the family constantly made subtle remarks about his African American heritage. They would disguise their racism as jokes or backhanded compliments about how articulate he was or how surprised they were by his professional success. They treated him like a diversity project they could parade around at country club dinners while secretly viewing him as nothing more than a convenient bank account to fund their luxurious lifestyle. He told me Monica never defended him. She just laughed along with her mother and told him to stop being so sensitive. He said he was pouring his blood and sweat into a family that fundamentally despised him and felt completely entitled to every dollar he earned. I stood there listening to the pain and exhaustion in his voice. Everything he said resonated with my own miserable experience. I knew exactly how it felt to be viewed as a walking automated teller machine by Beatrice and her entitled children. But my mind was already racing past the emotional devastation and shifting straight into analytical overdrive. I am a forensic accountant, and my brain naturally looks for patterns in numerical chaos. I stared out at the dark suburban street and started adding the pieces together. Bradley had secretly taken out a personal loan for $150,000 against our house just a few weeks ago. He had wired it to a phantom holding company. Now Monica had illegally drained $50,000 from her husband's business account for a mysterious family investment orchestrated by their mother. 150,000 plus 50,000 equals exactly $200,000. It was a perfectly round number. People do not steal perfectly round numbers for everyday expenses. They steal round numbers for major down payments or massive acquisitions. The math was undeniably clear, and the timing was far too perfect to be a simple coincidence. This was a coordinated financial extraction. Beatrice was pooling their stolen resources for something huge. I looked back at Trey. His eyes were focused on the glass doors watching Monica laugh with Rebecca in my living room. I reached out and grabbed his arm firmly. He looked at me in surprise. I told him he was not crazy and he was not alone in this fight. I leaned close so no one else could hear us over the loud music. I told him we were both being robbed blind by the exact same people. I said I had proof Bradley was stealing from me too. We needed to stop feeling sorry for ourselves and fight back. I tugged his sleeve and told him to come to my office now. I pulled Trey through the sliding glass doors. We slipped past oblivious guests. I pulled Trey down the carpeted hallway and into my home office. We crossed the threshold. I shut the solid oak door. I turned the deadbolt with a sharp click. The heavy wood muffled the chatter. It plunged us into a tense silence. Trey stood in the center of the room. His chest was heaving. His dark eyes demanded answers. I did not waste time. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. "Come here," I ordered. "Look at this." Trey stepped behind my chair. He leaned over my shoulder. I pulled up the forensic software. I opened the digital ledger I compiled last night. I pointed to the first row. 2 weeks ago, Bradley took out a $150,000 personal loan using our house equity as collateral. He forged my digital signature to secure the funds. He wired the entire amount to a Delaware shell company called Apex Consulting Holding. Trey stared at the screen. I hid another key to bring up a second window. Look at the routing numbers from your bank statement. I pulled up a scanned image of the document he dropped. I hacked into the Delaware registry this morning. The $50,000 Monica transferred out of your account yesterday went to the exact same routing number. Apex Consulting Holding. $150,000 from Bradley. $50,000 from Monica. $200,000 total. Trey leaned closer. His breath hitched. Why, he asked. His voice was raw. Why would Monica siphon my money into a fake company with Bradley? What are they buying? I opened a hidden video player. I installed a discrete motion-activated security camera in the living room ceiling vent months ago. I clicked play on a file timestamped 3 days ago. The video showed the room. Bradley walked into the frame. He was followed by Rebecca. They were laughing. Bradley pulled her into his arms. He kissed her deeply. Rebecca smiled. She ran her fingers through his hair. Her expression was calculating. We have the $200,000, Bradley said on the recording. The down payment for the commercial space is secured. Once the ink is dry on the lease, I will serve Paige the divorce papers. You will have your dream art gallery. I will finally be free of that rigid bore. Monica did her part, and she is thrilled to get a percentage. We are going to be rich. I paused the video. The silence was deafening. Trey stood frozen. His eyes locked on the paused image of Bradley and Rebecca intertwined on my sofa. His hard-earned money was not going toward a family emergency. His wife stole his money to fund a vanity project for the mistress of her brother. I watched his hands curl into tight fists. A low, guttural sound escaped his throat. He turned toward the locked door. His body vibrated with violent intent. I am going to kill him, Trey snarled. He took a heavy step toward the exit. I am going to rip his head off in front of every guest. Then I am going to make Monica pack her bags. I stepped directly into his path. I placed both hands flat against his chest to stop his momentum. No, I commanded. My voice was sharp and absolute. You are not going to do anything. Trey glared at me. His eyes were burning. Get out of my way, Paige. They are laughing at us right now. They are drinking our wine and spending our money. If you walk out there and explode, you give them exactly what they want, I fired back. Beatrice will paint you as the unstable husband. Bradley will play the victim. They will use your anger against you in court. They will hide the assets, and you will lose your business. Trey stopped pushing against me. His breathing was ragged, but the logic in my words was penetrating his rage. He clenched his jaw, waiting for me to continue. We are dealing with parasites, Trey, I said. My tone turned calm. Parasites do not stop feeding until the host is dead. If we expose them now, we only get a fraction of our revenge. We need to let them sign the lease. We let them transfer the funds irrevocably into a venture they cannot back out of. We let them dig their own deep graves. Trey stared at me. The fury in his eyes slowly transformed into a cold, calculating determination. You want to destroy them completely, he realized. I want them destitute, I confirmed. My voice was devoid of mercy. I want Bradley stripped of every asset. I want Beatrice humiliated in front of her friends. I want Monica to realize she traded the loyalty of her husband for a spectacular financial collapse. I have the skills to dismantle their entire lives. But I need you to stay quiet. I need you to play the devoted husband for just a little longer. Trey looked back at the paused video on my laptop screen, staring at the face of the man who was destroying our lives. He looked at the bank statement crumpled on my desk, the physical proof of the betrayal of his wife. His anger was gone, replaced by a ruthless resolve. He extended his hand toward me. We burn it all completely to the ground, Trey said. His voice was a cold, lethal whisper. I gripped his hand firmly, sealing our new alliance. Every single last ash, I promised. Suddenly, heavy footsteps thudded against the hardwood floor in the hallway. A hand grasped the brass doorknob of the office. It violently twisted back and forth. The locked mechanism held firm. It rattled loudly in the quiet space. Paige. The muffled, suspicious voice of Bradley echoed heavily through the thick wooden door. "Why is this door locked? What are you and Trey doing in there?" I shoved a thick stack of tax forms from my desk drawer into Trey's hands. I gave him a sharp, commanding look, silently demanding his cooperation. He nodded, replacing his residual anger with a look of corporate exhaustion. I unlocked the heavy oak door and pulled it open with a perfectly practiced smile. Bradley stood in the hallway, his posture rigid. His jaw was tight, gears turning in his head as he searched for an accusation to hurl. "Just giving Trey some free advice on his firm's tax deductions," I said smoothly, stepping aside. "You know how the IRS is. They have been cracking down on architectural firms claiming personal travel as business expenses. Trey was just asking me to look over his quarterly filings to make sure everything was ironclad." Trey stepped up right on cue. He waved the papers in his hand, letting out a heavy, convincing sigh. "It is a nightmare, Brad. Paige is a lifesaver." I was about to misclassify a huge equipment depreciation. The fines would have been brutal. Bradley's eyes shifted from the papers to Trey's face, searching for a crack in the story. Finding none, his rigid posture relaxed slightly. The suspicion in his eyes faded, replaced by his usual arrogant condescension. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Well, do not keep her too long," Trey Bradley said, leaning against the doorframe. "She is working entirely too much lately. It is starting to take a toll on her." I kept my smile bright and steady. "I am fine, Bradley. Just helping out family." Bradley crossed his arms over his chest. He looked around my office, his gaze lingering on the expensive leather chairs and the mahogany bookshelves I had purchased with my first major promotion bonus. He always hated this room. It was a physical reminder of my success, a space where he had absolutely no authority. He took a step closer to me, invading my personal space in a subtle display of dominance. "Speaking of family," Bradley said casually, as if mentioning the weather, "I meant to tell you, Mom is going to be moving in with us next month." My heart stopped, but my face remained perfectly composed. "Moving in?" I asked, keeping my tone light and inquisitive. Bradley nodded, a smug smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Just to help out. You are always so stressed with your corporate audits, and the house is frankly too much for you to manage alone. You heard what Rebecca said. The place lacks a certain warmth. Mom has graciously offered to take over the domestic responsibilities. She will take the guest suite downstairs. It is already decided." He delivered the news as an absolute mandate. There was no discussion, no request for my input. He was moving his mother into the house I paid for, effectively installing a warden to monitor my every move while he funneled our equity to his mistress. He wanted me to argue. He wanted me to snap so he could tell the guests downstairs that his ungrateful wife was throwing a tantrum over his sweet, helpful mother. I looked at Trey, who was gripping the tax forms so tightly his knuckles were white. He knew exactly what this meant. I turned my attention back to my husband. I let a warm, flawless smile spread across my face. "That is wonderful," I said, my voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I truly appreciate her stepping up. Actually, I have a massive surprise planned for the whole family next month. Her moving in will make the timing absolutely perfect." Bradley looked momentarily confused by my enthusiastic agreement. He searched my eyes for sarcasm, but found only bright, compliant joy. "Good," he muttered, slightly deflated that his ambush had failed to provoke a fight. "Just wrap it up in here. People are starting to leave." Bradley turned and walked back down the hallway. Trey looked at me, sheer disbelief etched across his face. He shook his head slowly, silently, acknowledging the absolute insanity of what had just transpired. We shared a single resolute nod before he slipped out of the office to join the remaining guests. I spent the next 2 hours performing the duties of the perfect hostess. I collected empty wine glasses, thanked Beatrice's pretentious friends for attending, and smiled pleasantly as Rebecca gave Bradley a lingering, overly familiar hug goodbye. Beatrice stood by the front door, loudly praising her own organizational skills and reminding everyone that she would soon be a permanent fixture in the neighborhood. Finally, the last guest departed. Bradley immediately retreated upstairs, claiming he was exhausted from playing the charming host. Beatrice locked the front door and headed to the guest suite to inspect her future domain. The house fell into a heavy, oppressive silence. I walked into the kitchen. The catering staff had already cleaned the counters and packed away their equipment. The room was pristine, smelling of expensive surface cleaner and lemon. I moved silently across the tile floor, stopping directly in front of the marble island. I dropped to one knee, reaching my hand underneath the overhang. My fingers brushed against the small plastic casing. I pulled the micro audio recorder free, the adhesive peeling away with a soft tear. I carried the tiny device up the stairs, bypassing the master bedroom where Bradley was already snoring. I returned to my locked office, sat at my desk, and plugged the recorder directly into my laptop via a secure USB cable. I opened the audio file, bypassing hours of clinking glasses and meaningless party chatter. I used the waveform visualizer to isolate the audio spikes that occurred precisely when Beatrice and Rebecca had been standing by the island. I found the exact timestamp, put on my studio headphones, hit the play button, and listened to a playback of Beatrice and Rebecca whispering, "Don't worry, Rebecca. As soon as I move in, I'll force Paige to sign her name off the deed." The recording confirmed everything. Beatrice was the architect of my ruin. I saved the file and wiped the recorder. 1 month later, Beatrice arrived with 10 suitcases. The psychological war of attrition began before she even unpacked her first bag. I returned from the office to find the foyer completely unrecognizable. My imported Italian console table was gone. In its place stood a flimsy fake wood credenza that looked salvaged from a discount outlet. A plastic bowl of fake fruit sat in the middle. I walked into the living room. The original abstract canvas I had commissioned was missing from the mantel. A cheap factory-produced floral print hung crookedly on the wall. Beatrice emerged from the kitchen holding a mug of my imported tea. She took a loud sip. "I redecorated," Beatrice announced. Her tone left no room for debate. "Your taste is too cold, Paige. A house needs to feel like a home." Bradley agrees with me. He said the old stuff made him feel like he was living in a museum. I kept my expression blank. I did not ask where my belongings were. I knew she had shoved them into the basement or tossed them out entirely. "It certainly looks different," I said, my voice perfectly level. "It looks like a family lives here now," she corrected sharply. The invasion did not stop at the ground floor. When I walked upstairs, I found the door to the master suite wide open. I stepped inside and stopped dead in my tracks. My massive closet had been ransacked. My designer suits and silk blouses had been shoved tightly into the back corner, crushing the delicate fabrics. Beatrice had commandeered the entire front half of the closet. Her brightly colored polyester dresses and heavily perfumed coats hung aggressively on my velvet hangers. She followed me up the stairs and leaned against the doorframe. "The closet in the guest suite is terribly cramped," she complained, waving a dismissive hand. "Since you spend all your time at the office, you hardly need quick access to your wardrobe. I organized it so you can still reach your little work outfits." I slowly turned to face her. I forced a docile smile onto my face. "Thank you, Beatrice. You are always thinking of practicality." She narrowed her eyes, searching my face for sarcasm. Finding none, her posture shifted into something predatory. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a folded stack of legal papers. She marched across my bedroom and shoved the documents directly against my chest. I instinctively raised my hands to take them. "Sign these," Beatrice ordered. Her voice was devoid of the fake maternal warmth she used around Bradley. I looked down at the documents. The bold print at the top was unmistakable. It was a property deed modification. "What is this?" I asked, playing the role of the confused, overwhelmed wife. "It adds my name to the deed of the house," Beatrice stated calmly. "It is for his security." "You work entirely too much, Paige. The stress is bound to catch up with you. What happens if your stressful job gives you a heart attack? Or if you get into a terrible car accident? Bradley would be tied up in probate court for months trying to secure his own home. This just streamlines things. It protects my son." She was framing a blatant property theft as a favor. She wanted to lock me out of my own asset so she could sell it and funnel the cash to Rebecca and her art gallery venture. "I understand your concern for him," I murmured softly, letting my shoulders slump. I looked at the floor, projecting total submission. "You are right. The corporate audits have been overwhelming lately. I am just so exhausted." Beatrice smiled a cold, victorious sneer. She pulled a silver pen from her other pocket and clicked it open. Then just sign it right now. I will take it to the notary down the street tomorrow. I clutched the papers tightly against my chest. I absolutely will, I promised, looking up at her with trusting eyes. But you know how my corporate compliance training is. I have to let my lawyer do a standard review of any property documents first, just to make sure there are no tax liabilities for Bradley. I will drop it off at his office tomorrow morning. It should only take a day. Beatrice scowled, clearly annoyed by the delay, but the mention of protecting Bradley from taxes pacified her. Fine, she snapped, snatching her pen back. But do not drag your feet. Bradley needs peace of mind. She turned and marched out of the master suite, her heavy footsteps echoing down the stairs. I listened until I heard the television turn on in the living room. I tossed the fraudulent deed onto the bed. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but it was not mine. It was the distinct chime of the secondary work phone Bradley had accidentally left charging on his nightstand that morning. I walked over to his side of the bed. The screen was lit up with a missed call notification. I picked up the device. It was fully unlocked. A voicemail notification popped up on the screen. The caller identification displayed the name Mr. Gallagher. This was the regional director. I tapped the icon and brought the phone to my ear. I intercepted a panicked voicemail on the phone from his boss, Mr. Gallagher. The audio was crisp and urgent. "Bradley, we have a massive problem," Mr. Gallagher said, his voice shaking with barely contained panic. "The quarterly audit just flagged the accounts you manage. We have a $300,000 discrepancy in the regional accounts. The money is just gone. The auditors are escalating this to corporate by the end of the week. Do not do anything right now. Do not talk to anyone about this mess. Call me back immediately. We need a perfect cover story." I replayed the voicemail 3 times. The sheer panic in the voice of Mr. Gallagher was unmistakable. $300,000 was a massive discrepancy for a regional account. I quickly transferred the audio file to my secure encrypted drive and wiped the call log from the burner phone of my husband. I placed the device back on the nightstand exactly where he left it. My pulse thumped a steady adrenaline-fueled rhythm. I practically sprinted down the hall to my home office and locked the door. I fired up my primary workstation and activated my virtual private network. It was time to see exactly what Bradley was hiding in his corporate ledgers. He worked for a mid-sized logistics firm that handled commercial supply chains across the East Coast. It was a tedious industry, which made it the perfect camouflage for financial crimes. I bypassed the standard employee portals and used a backdoor entry I had coded months ago to monitor his stock options. I navigated straight to the regional accounts Mr. Gallagher had mentioned. The numbers sprawling across my monitor were a chaotic mess of poorly disguised transactions. I pulled the data into my forensic analysis software and let the algorithms chew through the raw numbers. Within 20 minutes, the software highlighted a glaring pattern of anomalies. Bradley was not just fudging expense reports. He had constructed an elaborate multi-layered embezzlement scheme. He was routing corporate funds through phantom vendors. These fake supply companies submitted inflated invoices for logistical services that were never rendered. The company paid the invoices, and the money vanished into offshore accounts before being funneled back into domestic shell corporations. I cross-referenced the domestic shell companies with the Delaware registry I hacked previously. The routing numbers matched Apex Consulting Holding perfectly. Bradley was bleeding his own employer dry to fund his secret life with Rebecca. But the $300,000 was just the tip of the iceberg. I dug deeper into the archival records spanning the last 4 years. The total amount of stolen funds was closer to $2 million. He had been skimming kickbacks from legitimate clients and pocketing the difference. I sat back in my leather chair. The soft glow of the monitor illuminated the dark room. I stared at the irrefutable proof of his criminal enterprise. A bitter realization washed over me. I murmured a quiet curse into the empty office space. My heart pounded. Bradley always bragged about his massive sales commissions. He justified his luxury car leases, his custom-tailored suits, and his constant golf weekends with high-profile clients as necessary business expenses. He claimed he was a top earner. The truth was entirely different. His legitimate commissions were pathetic. His extravagant lifestyle was funded entirely by stealing from his employer and leeching off my substantial salary. I had been paying the mortgage, covering the utilities, and funding his retirement accounts while he hoarded stolen cash to build a new life with his mistress. He was a complete parasite. He took everything I earned and used it to subsidize his own twisted fantasies of wealth and power. I did not stop at the corporate accounts. I cross-verified the fraudulent invoices with his personal tax filings. Bradley had committed federal tax fraud by failing to report the embezzled income while simultaneously claiming illicit deductions on the phantom companies. The sheer arrogance of his operation was staggering. He left a digital paper trail so obvious that a first-year accounting student could have unraveled it. He thought he was untouchable because he believed no one would ever look closely enough. He underestimated his wife. I compiled every fraudulent invoice, every offshore wire transfer, and every fake tax deduction into a comprehensive digital dossier. I created a secure encrypted folder and synced it to my private cloud server. I also sent a copy to Trey. We now held the power to send Bradley to federal prison for a very long time. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. The raw data transformed my simmering anger into cold, absolute clarity. I was no longer just dealing with a cheating husband. I was married to a felon. I unlocked my office door and walked downstairs to the kitchen. Beatrice was already bustling around, loudly barking orders at Bradley, who was nervously arranging wine glasses on the dining room table. He looked pale and distracted. He kept checking his pockets, clearly realizing he had misplaced his burner phone. I watched him squirm under the weight of his own secrets, knowing his entire world was about to collapse. I smiled warmly at him, pouring myself a glass of sparkling water. I praised Beatrice for the incredible aroma of her roast chicken, playing the role of the docile, appreciative daughter-in-law. Bradley shot me a suspicious look, but quickly turned away to answer a text on his primary phone. His hand visibly trembled as he typed. The doorbell rang sharply, shattering the tense atmosphere in the house. I walked to the foyer and opened the heavy wooden door. Monica and Trey stood on the porch. Monica pushed past me, carrying a cheap bottle of wine and complaining about the traffic. Trey caught my eye as he stepped inside. His posture was rigid, but his gaze was sharp and focused. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. He had received the encrypted dossier. He knew exactly what Bradley had done. We moved into the dining room. Beatrice directed everyone to their seats, ensuring she took the head of the table. She completely usurped my position in my own home. I sat quietly next to Trey. Bradley took the seat across from us, sweating slightly under the collar of his expensive shirt. The room fell silent as Beatrice picked up her silver spoon. She stood proudly at the head of the table. She raised her crystal wine glass and began clinking the spoon against the rim for a grand announcement. Beatrice struck her crystal wine glass with a silver spoon, creating a sharp chime. The sound echoed through the dining room, immediately halting the noise of scraping silverware and Monica complaining about traffic. Beatrice stood. She smoothed her cardigan and surveyed the room with smug authority. I sat at the opposite end, my posture perfectly relaxed. Trey sat to my right, his face an impenetrable mask. Monica sat across from him, pouring a third glass of my imported Cabernet. Bradley flanked his mother, his expression arranged into pious solemnity. "I have a special announcement," Beatrice declared. Her voice swelled with emotion. "We know how much this family values loyalty. Today we received truly miraculous news. Our dear friend Rebecca is expecting a child." The room fell into silence. I locked eyes with Beatrice, feeling the cold weight of the digital dossier on my server. Bradley was having a child with his mistress, and his mother was announcing it like a charity cause. Monica gasped in surprise, clapping her hands. "Oh, that is wonderful news!" she exclaimed, vibrating with excitement. "Rebecca has been through so much lately. She deserves a little blessing." Trey did not move. His eyes flickered toward me, burning with silent, radioactive fury. He knew Monica's stolen money was directly funding this twisted charade. "Yes, a blessing," Beatrice continued, placing a hand over her heart. But Rebecca is facing a difficult road. The father is out of the picture. He abandoned her almost immediately. She is a struggling single mother now trying to get her art gallery off the ground while facing the terrifying prospect of raising a baby entirely alone. She needs a village. She needs us. Bradley nodded gravely, playing the role of the noble, empathetic savior to absolute perfection. He looked across the table at me, his eyes wide with manufactured compassion. "Mom is right," Paige Bradley said, his voice dripping with earnest sincerity. "Rebecca has been a loyal friend to this family. We cannot just turn our backs on her when she is vulnerable. I think it is our moral duty to step up. I was thinking we could allocate a portion of our joint family savings to help her get settled. Just a safety net to cover her prenatal care and maybe help with the gallery lease until she is on her feet." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his request washed over me like ice water. He was asking me to legally authorize the use of my own income to support his pregnant mistress. He was trying to launder the embezzled corporate funds through our joint accounts, using his mother as the emotional shield. I did not react. I simply reached for my wineglass, letting the silence stretch out and make them sweat. Beatrice, impatient with my lack of immediate compliance, decided to force the issue. She leaned forward, resting her hands on the table, and leveled a mocking, pitying glare directly at me. "It is the least we can do, Paige," Beatrice sneered, her voice dropping into a vicious, condescending register. "Since you are clearly far too career-obsessed to ever give my son a child, we have the resources to spare. Your corporate audits and late nights at the office have obviously taken priority over building a real family. The least we can do is use some of that money to help a real mother who actually values children over climbing the corporate ladder." Monica snickered into her wineglass. Bradley offered a weak, performative sigh, feigning disapproval of his mother's harsh words while secretly reveling in the insult. "Come on, Mom, that is a bit harsh," Bradley murmured, not looking at me. "But Paige, you have to admit we have more than enough. It is just a temporary financial bridge. You are always talking about supporting women in business. Rebecca is starting a gallery. She is a future mother. It aligns perfectly with your values." I looked at the three of them. I looked at the parasitic rot infecting my home. Bradley, the corporate felon stealing hundreds of thousands from his employer. Monica, the treacherous sister funneling her husband's hard-earned business capital into a Delaware shell company. Beatrice, the cruel matriarch, orchestrating the entire psychological war while sleeping under my roof. They thought they had me perfectly boxed in. They thought my desire to maintain peace would override my financial common sense. They thought I was a blind, submissive ATM. I brought the crystal rim of the wine glass to my lips. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark red liquid. I swallowed, letting the rich vintage coat my throat. I lowered the glass and let a flawless, serene smile blossom across my face. "Of course," I said softly. My voice was smooth, warm, and entirely devoid of hesitation. "Money is absolutely nothing compared to family. If Rebecca needs our help, we will make sure she is completely taken care of. We can review the joint accounts tomorrow morning and transfer whatever she needs." Beatrice blinked, momentarily stunned by my rapid capitulation. Her triumphant sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Bradley let out a massive, visible breath of relief, completely falling for the trap. Monica beamed, already calculating her percentage of the stolen loot. Dinner resumed in a state of euphoric celebration. They laughed and joked openly, discussing baby names and gallery launch parties, completely oblivious to the forensic guillotine hanging inches above their necks. I calmly cut my steak, chewing methodically, as they toasted to their own impending destruction. Beneath the heavy oak table, the atmosphere was entirely different. I felt a slight vibration against my thigh. I glanced down. In the shadows of the table, Linen Trey held his phone angled toward me. The screen lit up in the darkness, displaying a single encrypted text message he had just sent to my device. The glaring white words illuminated his white-knuckled grip. "I tracked the money. I know exactly what they bought." The chaotic din of the downtown espresso bar provided the perfect acoustic cover. I sat in a secluded corner booth sipping a black coffee while pretending to review a quarterly risk assessment on my tablet. Trey arrived exactly 10 minutes after I did. He bypassed the counter completely and slid into the leather booth opposite me. His face was a mask of cold, calculating fury. He looked like a man who had not slept for a single second since our dinner the night before. He placed a thick manila folder on the table and pushed it precisely across the polished wood until it rested against my coffee cup. I did not need to ask what it was. I opened the flap and stared at a stack of wire transfer confirmations, banking ledgers, and property deeds. I tracked the $200,000 Monica siphoned from our joint accounts, Trey said. His voice was a harsh, raspy whisper. He leaned in closer, his eyes scanning the bustling cafe before locking onto mine. She did not just make a bad investment. She did not lose it in the stock market like she claimed when I first noticed the discrepancy last month. She deliberately liquidated the capital reserves for my architectural firm. I flipped to the second page of the dossier. It was a digital copy of a corporate authorization form. The signature at the bottom read, Trey Evans, but the penmanship was slightly too rigid, the loops too forced. She forged my signature, Trey stated, confirming my suspicion. She bypassed our dual authorization mandate by submitting a fraudulent corporate resolution to the bank. Monica committed a federal offense. She risked federal prison to appease her mother and her brother. I stared at the forged document. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. Monica had jeopardized her husband's business, his livelihood, and her own freedom, all to fund Bradley's illicit second life. Where did the money go? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. Trey flipped to the next page. It was a property registration document from a highly exclusive real estate agency. The $200,000 was wired directly to an escrow account in the Bahamas. It was used as a cash down payment for a luxury vacation villa. I scanned the property details. It was a stunning beachfront estate, the kind of place billionaires purchase to escape the winter. But the name listed as the sole proprietor on the deed was what made my blood run cold. It was not Bradley. It was not Monica. Rebecca, I murmured, reading the bold print on the registration line. The entire property is registered exclusively under her name. Trey nodded, his jaw tight. Bradley and Monica pooled their stolen resources to buy that struggling single mother a multi-million-dollar vacation home. Bradley is using his embezzled corporate funds to pay the monthly mortgage, and Monica provided the initial capital injection by robbing my firm. They set Rebecca up for life. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place, Beatrice orchestrating the psychological warfare in my home. Bradley playing the stressed executive while skimming hundreds of thousands from his employer. Monica committing wire fraud to secure the down payment. They were functioning as a unified criminal syndicate. They believed they could strip Trey and me of our assets, funnel the wealth to Rebecca, and leave us holding the empty bags. We have them, I said, tapping the folder. My corporate backdoor into Bradley's logistics firm gave us the embezzlement trail. Your forensic accounting gives us Monica's wire fraud. We possess enough hard evidence to secure multi-year federal sentences for both of them. Trey leaned back in the booth. The anger in his eyes was slowly being replaced by something much more dangerous. Absolute, icy resolve. We do not just hand this over to the authorities yet. If we report them right now, the government freezes everything. My business capital gets tied up in federal litigation for years. I need to force Monica to return the funds to my corporate account first. He was entirely correct. We needed a surgical strike. We needed to corner them, strip them of their stolen assets, and then let the authorities deal with the wreckage. We wait for the perfect moment, I agreed. We let them think their plan is working flawlessly. We let Beatrice believe she is breaking me down. We let Bradley believe his audit cover-up is holding. Trey stood up from the booth. He buttoned his tailored suit jacket and gave me a single resolute nod. Keep playing the submissive wife, Paige. Let them dig their graves a little deeper. I will monitor the escrow account and prepare the legal traps. I watched him walk out of the cafe, his posture rigid with newfound purpose. I gathered the dossier, tucked it securely into my briefcase, and headed back to the suburban nightmare I currently called home. The drive back to the house gave me time to process the sheer audacity of Monica's actions. She had destroyed her marriage for the sake of Beatrice's approval. The toxic loyalty in that family was stronger than any legal or moral boundary. I pulled into the driveway and parked my car. The house was quiet as I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The cheap fake wood credenza Beatrice had installed stared back at me, a physical reminder of her ongoing invasion. I placed my briefcase on the floor and took off my coat. I turned the corner to head toward the kitchen, but stopped dead in my tracks. Beatrice was blocking the narrow hallway, aggressively waving the fraudulent deed transfer papers she had tried to force on me the previous day. Her eyes burned with pure, unadulterated malice. She took a menacing step forward, closing the distance between us. "Sign it now, or I will tell Bradley to divorce you and take half of everything." I stared at the thick stack of legal documents trembling in the hands of my mother-in-law. Beatrice stood in the hallway, her jaw set with absolute, unyielding malice. She possessed the unwavering confidence of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. The threat of forcing Bradley to divorce me and take half of everything hung in the stale air of the foyer. It was a bluff, of course. Bradley would never leave his primary source of income voluntarily, not when he needed my salary to cover the massive hole he had dug in his corporate accounts. But Beatrice did not know about the deep dive forensics. She only knew she wanted her name on my house, and she wanted it today. I needed to buy time to let Trey finish setting the financial traps, and I needed Beatrice to walk away, believing she had achieved absolute dominion over my life. I let my briefcase slip from my fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. I took a slow, shuddering breath, forcing my shoulders to slump. I looked up at her, letting my eyes widen with manufactured panic. Then I let my knees buckle. I dropped to the floor, the rough wood pressing against my shins. I buried my face in my hands and let out a loud, ragged sob. The sound echoed through the hallway, a perfect pitch, perfect imitation of a woman whose spirit had just snapped in half. "Please," I gasped, my voice trembling with artificial hysteria. "Please, Beatrice, do not do this. Do not take him away from me. I have given everything to this marriage. I have worked 80-hour weeks to build a life for us. I cannot lose him." Beatrice looked down at me. The harsh lines of her face softened into a look of supreme toxic satisfaction. She had waited years for this exact moment. She wanted me broken, humiliated, and begging for scraps of affection from a man who despised me. "You brought this on yourself, Paige," she said coldly. "You prioritized your spreadsheets and your promotions over your duties as a wife. You failed to give him a child. You failed to make this house a home. Now you have to face the consequences. A man needs to secure his legacy. Sign the deed." I looked up, making sure my face was wet with real tears I had summoned by thinking about the absolute absurdity of my situation. I sniffled, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand like a scolded child. "I will sign it," I cried softly, staring at the polished floorboards. "I will give you the house. I will give you whatever you want. But please let me do it my way." Our 5th wedding anniversary dinner is this Friday. All of Bradley's friends will be there. The partners from his firm are coming. Your friends are coming. If I sign this right now in a dark hallway, it means nothing. Beatrice narrowed her eyes, immediately suspicious. "What are you talking about?" "I want to do it in front of everyone," I lied, injecting a pathetic, pleading tone into my voice. "I want to stand up at the anniversary dinner and publicly present the signed deed to you and Bradley. I want to show his colleagues and our friends that I'm fully committed to this family. I want to prove my ultimate loyalty. If I do it publicly, it will prove to Bradley that I respect your position as the matriarch. It will show him I am willing to put my career second. Just give me until Friday. Please." Beatrice fell silent, processing the offer. The sheer arrogance of her personality made the bait irresistible. She did not just want my house. She wanted a public spectacle. She wanted to humiliate me in front of high society. She wanted to stand at a grand dinner party and watch the successful independent daughter-in-law publicly surrender her greatest asset. The theatricality of it appealed to her vicious nature. "Friday," Beatrice demanded. Her tone was sharp and uncompromising. Friday night, I confirmed, nodding vigorously while maintaining my position on the floor. Right before the champagne toast, "I will have my lawyer draw up the transfer protocols to ensure there are no tax liabilities, and I will hand you the physical deed in front of the entire room. You will have total control." Beatrice sneered. A slow, victorious smile stretched across her face. She looked down at me like a queen surveying a conquered peasant. She stepped over my briefcase, her heavy shoes loudly thudding against the floor. "See that you do," she snapped. "And wipe your face. You look absolutely pathetic." She turned on her heel and marched into the kitchen humming a cheerful tune. I listened to her footsteps fade away. I listened to the refrigerator door open and close. The second she was out of earshot, the performance ended. The heavy, ragged breathing stopped instantly. I wiped the stray tears from my cheeks, my expression hardening into solid ice. I pushed myself up from the floor, my movements precise and completely controlled. I picked up my black leather briefcase, the handle feeling reassuringly solid in my firm grip. I walked quietly up the stairs to my home office and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. The house was silent again, save for the faint sound of Beatrice banging pots in the kitchen below. I sat at my desk and pulled my personal encrypted cell phone from my jacket pocket. I dialed a number I had memorized years ago. The line rang twice before a sharp professional voice answered. "Law offices of Sterling and Vance. This is Vance speaking. It is Paige," I spoke, my voice utterly devoid of that pathetic quiver I had just utilized downstairs. I then instructed, "Draft the liability transfer. Let them think it's an ownership deed. Bury the poison pill in paragraph 4. Arthur understood the corporate assignment perfectly. He confirmed that the finalized document would be delivered via encrypted courier by Tuesday morning, giving me 3 clear days to structure the upcoming trap. I hung up the phone and walked out of my office with a calm expression, completely erasing any visible trace of the shattered, defeated woman I had simulated for Beatrice downstairs. Over the next days, I operated with cold, calculated precision, leveraging my elite professional network to orchestrate a public spectacle that the city high society circle would never forget. I bypassed standard event planners and safely booked the main grand ballroom at the Grand Pavilion, the absolute pinnacle of fine dining in the metropolitan area. The venue cost an astronomical amount, but every single cent came directly from a corporate promotional expense line that I fully controlled, ensuring that neither Bradley nor Beatrice could trace the financial planning. I curated the guest list like a high-stakes litigation folder. I reached out to Beatrice's entire high society circle, including the executive board of her beloved Historical Preservation Society, the very women she spent decades trying to impress. They accepted the invitations, instantly drawn by the allure of an exclusive, luxurious menu and the promise of a major family announcement. The next crucial phase of the setup required capturing Bradley, professional executioner. I placed a direct call to the office of his regional director, Mr. Gallagher. When his assistant tried to redirect me to a lower department, I utilized my status as a senior auditing partner to completely bypass the gatekeeper, stating that I possessed sensitive accounting data regarding the regional logistics accounts that required an immediate off-the-record discussion before Friday night. Gallagher picked up the line within 3 seconds, his breath short and tight, with the exact same frantic panic I had intercepted on the stolen burner phone voicemail. I smoothed my voice into a polished corporate purr, assuring him that my 5-year marriage anniversary gala was the ideal discreet environment to quietly handle our shared logistical interests. I explicitly told him that Bradley was preparing a comprehensive financial overview for the evening that would completely satisfy the compliance team demands. Gallagher, desperate for a cover story to mask the $300,000 bleeding artery in his regional balance sheets, swallowed the bait whole. He promised he would attend the gala alongside the senior stakeholders of the logistics firm, completely unaware that he was walking directly into a slaughterhouse. The trap was populated with every key player necessary for a total family execution. By Wednesday evening, the physical logistics were finalized, leaving only the primary targets to be maneuvered into their exact positions. I walked down into the living room, where Bradley was mindlessly staring at a sports broadcast, his legs stretched across my silk-upholstered ottoman. Beatrice sat at the adjacent mahogany table, aggressively addressing invitation cards for her mother's future occupancy of my downstairs guest suite. I poured 2 glasses of sparkling water and handed one to my husband, gracefully sitting on the arm of his chair with practiced, submissive compliance. I looked down at him with an expression of bright, superficial adoration, playing the role of the dutiful corporate wife. "Bradley, darling," I said softly, ensuring my voice carried across the room so Beatrice could hear every syllable. "I have finalized all the arrangements for our 5th anniversary gala at the Grand Pavilion this Friday evening. It is going to be a massive celebration of our marriage, and I have personally made sure that your regional director, Mr. Gallagher, and his entire executive committee will be seated at our primary table. I want your firm to see exactly how much I support your corporate advancement." Bradley choked slightly on his water, his eyes widening with sudden sharp terror as Gallagher's name left my lips. He sat up rigidly, his jaw tightening as he scrambled to find a plausible reason to object without alerting his mother to his embezzlement panic. "Gallagher is coming, Paige. That is an incredibly exclusive venue, and he is currently buried under a major corporate restructuring. Are you completely sure it is safe to invite my primary regional corporate executive boss?" "It is more than appropriate," I replied smoothly, leaning down to gently pat his cheek. "I told him you were preparing something monumental for the evening to address the regional numbers. And that brings me to the most important guest. I explicitly insist that Rebecca attend the gala as well. She needs to sit at the head table directly next to your mother." Bradley froze completely, his glass hovering mid-air. Beatrice stopped writing her cards, her sharp eyes flying up to lock onto my face with a mixture of suspicion and deep curiosity. The room fell into a suffocating silence as they both tried to calculate whether I had discovered the affair or if I had simply become entirely submissive to their demands. Rebecca Bradley stammered, his voice cracking slightly as he searched my face for any sign of an ambush. "Paige, she is a single mother going through a very sensitive pregnancy. Putting her in front of high society crowds and my corporate superiors might be entirely too stressful for her condition. I do not think she would feel comfortable." "Nonsense," I said, letting a warm, compliant smile spread across my face. "We are all one big modern family now, Bradley. Your mother made it abundantly clear that Rebecca needs our village, and since we are using our joint family funds to help her, it is only right that she celebrates this milestone with us. I want everyone to see how generous we are. She must be there." Beatrice let out a triumphant chuckle, her suspicion dissolving into greed. If Paige is being this mature, Bradley, then Rebecca absolutely must attend, Beatrice mandated, forcing him to invite her. Friday arrived quickly. As they dressed for the gala, Bradley kisses Paige's neck. "I'm so lucky to have a wife who finally knows her place." Paige smiles into the mirror. "You have no idea." The Grand Pavilion was a masterpiece of gilded architecture and dripping crystal. Stepping into the main ballroom felt like descending into a royal court, which was precisely the atmosphere I intended to cultivate for my impending execution. Vaulted ceilings painted with Renaissance frescoes arched high above a sprawling floor of polished Italian marble. A 12-piece string ensemble played a lively Vivaldi concerto from a raised mahogany dais. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos circulated seamlessly, carrying silver trays laden with imported caviar and flutes of vintage champagne. The elaborate floral arrangements on every table consisted of hundreds of imported white roses and rare orchids, filling the air with a heavy, intoxicating sweet perfume. Every single detail was meticulously crafted to maximize the psychological impact of my ultimate revenge. I stood near the grand entrance wearing a custom-tailored emerald gown that felt more like armor than silk, watching the parasitic infection of my family arrive in all their fraudulent glory. Beatrice was in her absolute element. She swept into the room draped in a heavy diamond necklace that I instantly recognized. It was a vintage Cartier piece, purchased using a secondary credit card tied directly to my corporate expense account. She strutted across the marble floor with the arrogant swagger of a conquering queen. Her elite high society circle immediately flocked to her side, their eyes wide with poorly concealed envy. I watched Beatrice gesture dramatically, laughing loudly as she paraded her stolen luxury. She pointed toward the center of the room, loudly boasting to the Preservation Society board members about how her son was single-handedly funding this magnificent spectacle. She was completely intoxicated by the illusion of supreme control. Bradley drifted through the crowd wearing a bespoke velvet tuxedo. His smile was rigidly pinned to his face. He played the part of the successful corporate magnate, flawlessly shaking hands and accepting early anniversary congratulations with practiced humility. But beneath the polished veneer, I could see the frantic, terrified energy vibrating through his posture. His eyes darted nervously toward the heavy double doors every few seconds. His anxiety spiked into visible panic the moment Rebecca crossed the threshold. She did not just arrive, she made an entrance. She wore a cascading, floor-length designer maternity gown made of spun silver silk. The fabric clung elegantly to her swelling stomach. I knew the exact retail price of that specific dress because the funds to purchase it had been wired from Trey's architectural firm just 4 days ago. Monica, standing near the ice sculpture, caught sight of her and immediately rushed over to offer a warm, sisterly embrace. They giggled together, completely shameless, standing in a room paid for by my money while wearing clothes paid for by Trey's ruined business. Rebecca smoothed her hands over her stomach and beamed at Bradley across the room. He gave her a tight, panicked nod, desperately trying to signal her to keep her distance. He was sweating. The walls of his double life were closing in, and the sheer volume of his deceit was beginning to crush him. The true masterpiece of my seating chart was the central VIP table, positioned directly beneath the largest crystal chandelier. I glided across the floor and personally escorted Mr. Gallagher to his designated seat. The regional director of Bradley's logistics firm was an imposing man with a sharp, calculating gaze. He thanked me graciously, completely unaware of his employee's massive deceit. I seated him directly across from Beatrice, ensuring that the matriarch of the family had a front-row view of the man who held her son's corporate fate in his hands. Trey stood silently by the bar. He held a glass of bourbon, his knuckles white around the crystal rim. He watched Monica laugh with Rebecca. His face was an impenetrable mask of cold stone. We made brief eye contact across the crowded ballroom. A silent, deadly confirmation passed between us. The players were all on the board. The doors were closed. There was absolutely no escape for any of them. Bradley nervously approached the VIP table, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled out a chair next to Mr. Gallagher. The director immediately leaned in, asking a pointed question about the quarterly audit. Bradley swallowed hard, his skin turning a sickly shade of pale as he stumbled through a rehearsed hollow lie about upcoming profit margins. He desperately tried to steer the conversation toward the catering, but Gallagher remained relentlessly focused on the numbers. The trap was locked. The time for pleasantries had expired. I signaled the string ensemble to halt their performance. The sudden silence was jarring, cutting through the ambient chatter like a blade. I stepped up to the microphone positioned at the head of the VIP table. I picked up a crystal champagne flute and a silver spoon. I tapped the glass 3 times. The sharp, clear chimes echoed through the cavernous ballroom. The remaining conversations died instantly. Every single eye in the room turned to face me. Beatrice leaned forward in her chair, a smug, expectant smirk plastered across her face. She adjusted her stolen diamonds, waiting for my public declaration of submission. She was waiting for me to hand over the deed to my home. Bradley looked at me with a mixture of relief and pride, convinced I was about to validate his ego in front of his boss. Monica smiled into her wineglass, and Rebecca rested a maternal hand on her stomach, looking up at me with brazen entitlement. I let the silence stretch out, allowing the tension to become heavy and palpable. I looked directly at Bradley. I let my warm smile fade into a flat, dead expression. 5 years ago, I thought I knew my husband, I announced. My voice was amplified, echoing off the high frescoed ceilings with crystal clarity. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers once, signaling the waiter to wheel out a silver cart carrying a heavily wrapped massive gift box. The wheels of the silver cart squeaked faintly against the polished marble floor. A waiter positioned the cart next to Bradley. Resting on the linen cloth was a massive box wrapped in blue velvet paper and tied with a thick silver ribbon. Its size commanded the entire room's attention. I kept my posture straight, locking eyes with my husband. He adjusted his silk bow tie, a look of manufactured humility washing over his face. He thought this was his coronation. He thought I was about to shower him with praise and hand his mother the deed to my home. To build a marriage requires absolute transparency. I continued, my voice projecting smoothly through the microphone. It requires a solid foundation, built on trust, and a mutual understanding of exactly where every ounce of our energy goes. Over the past 5 years, Bradley has dedicated an unbelievable amount of his time to his logistics firm. He spent countless nights working late, pouring his soul into securing his future with us. I felt it appropriate to commemorate his hard work with a physical representation of his achievements. Bradley, darling, please open your gift. A murmur of approval rippled through the guests. Beatrice beamed, nodding at her friends. Monica lifted her phone to record her brother receiving his extravagant tribute. Rebecca crossed her arms, her jaw set in a tight line of veiled jealousy. She hated seeing me act the part of the dutiful wife. At the VIP table, Mr. Gallagher offered a polite smile, impressed by the corporate solidarity I was projecting. Bradley stood up. He puffed out his chest as he approached the cart. He reached for the ribbon and pulled. It fell away flawlessly. He lifted the velvet lid and set it aside. Reaching into the box, he pulled out a heavy, luxurious black leather-bound album. The cover was blank, smooth, and expensive. He ran his hand over the leather, shooting me a grin so smug it made my stomach turn. He expected a curated collection of romantic photos, a sentimental scrapbook highlighting our wedded bliss that would solidify his image as the perfect family man. Bradley placed the heavy album flat on the table right next to Mr. Gallagher's water glass. He flipped open the cover, preparing to display his loving husband routine to the room. His smug smile did not just fade, it evaporated. It vaporized into a mask of absolute, unadulterated terror. The first page of the album did not feature a photograph from our honeymoon. It featured a high-resolution, full-color printout of a hidden corporate spreadsheet. The columns explicitly detailed the exact dates, times, and routing numbers of the funds he had actively embezzled from his regional logistics accounts. I watched his eyes dart frantically across the page, recognizing his own hidden ledgers, the ones he thought were safely buried beneath layers of encrypted corporate firewalls. He quickly flipped the page, his breathing suddenly turning shallow and erratic. The second page contained crystal-clear copies of the forged vendor invoices he had used to cover his tracks. The fake shell company names, the inflated billing hours, the fraudulent authorization signatures. Everything was laid out with meticulous forensic precision. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He flipped the page again, his hands beginning to shake violently. The third spread abandoned the financial data entirely. Instead, it displayed a series of high-definition security camera snapshots taken directly from the hidden lens in my living room ceiling. The images were undeniable. They showed Bradley and Rebecca intertwined on my white sofa, their clothes discarded on my floor, completely exposed in the harsh glare of the infrared night vision. The timestamps on the photos directly corresponded with the nights Bradley claimed he was pulling overtime at the logistics firm to finalize quarterly reports for Mr. Gallagher. I stood at the microphone, watching the blood drain completely from his face until he looked like a freshly embalmed corpse. He was suffocating in plain sight, drowning in the irrefutable evidence of his completely ruined life. As a wife, I always want to make sure my husband's true efforts are fully recognized, I said into the microphone. My voice dropped an octave, losing the warm, supportive tone and replacing it with a razor-sharp edge of pure ice. Some men build legacies, others build a mountain of lies so fragile that it only takes one single breath to bring the entire structure crashing down. Bradley panicked. His survival instincts kicked in, completely overriding any sense of decorum or logic. He slammed the heavy leather cover of the album shut with a loud, violent crack that echoed through the silent ballroom. He kept both hands pressed flat against the black leather, pinning it to the table as if trying to physically contain the radioactive fallout radiating from the pages. He looked wildly around the room, his chest heaving. "Nothing to see here," he stammered, his voice pitching up into a high, breathless squeak. "Just some silly private jokes. Just an inside joke between a husband and a wife. Right, Paige? Just a joke." Beatrice frowned, her triumphant glow faltering as she registered her son's bizarre, panicked reaction. Monica lowered her phone, looking completely confused. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her designer maternity gown, sensing the sudden catastrophic shift in the atmosphere. But it was Mr. Gallagher who reacted first. The regional director was not a fool. He had spent decades navigating the cutthroat corporate world, and he knew exactly what a cornered, guilty man looked like. He looked at Bradley's sweating, pale face, then down at the expensive leather album pinned beneath his shaking hands. The tension at the VIP table was thick enough to crack glass. Mr. Gallagher narrowed his sharp eyes. He did not ask for permission. He reached across the white linen tablecloth, grabbed the edge of the heavy black album, and ruthlessly snatched it directly out from under Bradley's trembling hands. He flipped the cover open. Mr. Gallagher stared down at the crisp white pages of the black leather album. The ballroom remained completely frozen, a grand stage holding its collective breath, while the regional director processed the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. I watched his eyes track the highlighted columns of forged routing numbers and inflated vendor invoices. The heavy silence stretched, broken only by the faint clinking of silverware from oblivious waiters in the far corridors. It took exactly 15 seconds for Gallagher to connect the fabricated financial data to the massive bleeding artery in his regional balance sheets. His posture changed instantly. The relaxed, polite demeanor of a gala guest vanished, replaced by the ruthless, predatory stance of a corporate executioner. A dark, terrifying shade of purple crept up his thick neck and spread violently across his face. The veins at his temples bulged against his skin. He did not look at Bradley. He did not ask for an explanation. Gallagher slammed his heavy fist onto the VIP table, rattling the crystal champagne flutes and sending a shockwave of terror through my husband. Gallagher reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out his mobile phone, and aggressively punched in a number. He held the device to his ear, his gaze locked onto Bradley with a look of unadulterated disgust. When the call connected, his voice thundered across the silent ballroom, completely ignoring the hundreds of high society guests watching the spectacle. "Get the entire corporate legal team on the line right now," Gallagher commanded, his voice dripping with pure venom, "and dispatch the police to the main ballroom of the Grand Pavilion. Tell them we have an open and shut case of grand larceny, corporate embezzlement, and wire fraud. Tell them the primary suspect is waiting for them in a velvet tuxedo." The word police struck Bradley like a physical blow. The last remnants of his arrogant facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The polished corporate magnate dissolved, leaving behind a pathetic, cowardly thief. Bradley's knees buckled beneath him. He collapsed onto the pristine Italian marble floor, landing hard at Gallagher's feet. He grabbed the hem of his director's suit jacket, his meticulously styled hair falling messily across his sweating forehead. "Mr. Gallagher, please," Bradley begged, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical whine. "I can fix this. I can pay it all back. I just needed a temporary loan to cover some personal family expenses. You have to understand it was just a misunderstanding. Please do not ruin my life. I will sign whatever you want. Just hang up the phone, I beg you." Gallagher violently kicked his leg backward forcefully, tearing his expensive tailored suit jacket entirely away from Bradley's grasping, desperate hands. He looked down at the pathetic, weeping man currently groveling on the floor with absolute chilling revulsion. You stole $300,000 from my personal corporate division to fund a cheap affair and a fraudulent lifestyle. Gallagher snarled, stepping backward away from the pathetic display. You are not a businessman, Bradley. You are a common thief, and you are going to spend the next decade rotting in a dark federal prison cell. At the adjacent table, Beatrice finally comprehended the catastrophic reality of the situation. Her golden child, the son she had weaponized to fund her elite social climbing, was currently weeping on the floor and facing imminent incarceration. The illusion of her supreme dominance was collapsing in real time. Her eyes darted wildly from the incriminating leather album to Gallagher's furious face, and finally they locked onto me. I stood perfectly still, my posture straight, offering her a smile of cold, calculated victory. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. I had orchestrated every single second of this public execution. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. The heavy vintage Cartier necklace suddenly looked absurd around her neck, a stolen trinket highlighting her absolute moral bankruptcy. Beatrice shot up from her chair, her manicured finger pointing directly at my face. She turned to the Preservation Society board members, desperately trying to salvage her shattered reputation. She is a venomous snake! Beatrice screamed, her voice shrill and desperate, echoing violently off the frescoed ceilings. She set my boy up. She fabricated those documents to ruin him because she is a jealous, barren, vindictive monster. Do not look at him. Look at her. She is the criminal here. She is trying to destroy our family legacy. Beatrice frantically searched the faces of her wealthy friends, expecting them to rally to her defense. Instead, she found only absolute chilling disgust. The elite women she had spent decades desperately trying to impress were physically recoiling from her. The president of the Historical Society set her champagne flute down, her expression a mixture of profound pity and utter revulsion. These women were born into wealth. They despised nothing more than vulgar, desperate fraud. They silently turned their backs on Beatrice, stepping away from her table as if her very presence was contagious. In less than a minute, her entire social standing was completely irreversibly annihilated. She was nothing to them now. The rejection pushed Beatrice over the edge of sanity. Deprived of her social armor and facing the total destruction of her parasitic lifestyle, she abandoned all pretense of high society elegance. She let out a guttural, furious shriek and lunged across the space separating us. Her arm pulled back, hand raised to deliver a vicious, desperate slap across my face. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, fully prepared to let her physically assault me in front of hundreds of witnesses and a room full of security cameras. Just as her perfectly manicured right hand violently descended toward my cheek, intending to strike, a deep, booming, commanding voice completely shattered the surrounding chaos. Enough. Trey stood up from his isolated seat at the polished wooden bar, his remarkably imposing frame suddenly dominating the entirely silent, breathless room. Trey's voice reverberated through the cavernous ballroom, carrying a heavy and metallic finality that instantly paralyzed Beatrice in her tracks. Her hand froze mere inches from my face. The entire high society crowd, already reeling from Bradley's spectacular downfall, collectively held its breath as Trey moved away from the polished mahogany bar. He walked with slow and deliberate heavy strides across the Italian marble floor. He did not look at Beatrice. He did not look at the weeping Bradley or the angry Mr. Gallagher. His cold and unblinking gaze was locked entirely on his wife. Monica's smug smirk completely vanished, replaced by a sudden and shallow confusion. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair at the VIP table, looking around at the silent and staring guests as her husband approached. The string quartet had long since stopped playing, leaving the room blanketed in a suffocating silence. The air was thick with the scent of white roses and impending doom. Trey stopped directly behind Monica's chair. The silence in the grand room was absolute, broken only by the faint and pathetic whimpers escaping Bradley's lips on the floor nearby. Trey reached inside his tailored suit jacket and withdrew a thick manila folder. He did not hand it to her gently. He raised his arm and dropped the folder flat onto the table directly into the center of her porcelain plate. The heavy paper slapped against the china, splattering her imported caviar across the pristine white linen tablecloth and onto the bodice of her expensive silk dress. Monica gasped loudly, her hands flying up to protect her ruined outfit. She stared down at the soiled folder, her eyes wide with mounting terror. She looked up at Trey, her voice trembling as she asked him what he was doing. Trey stared down at her with a look of absolute and chilling indifference. "Those are divorce papers," he stated, his voice echoing cleanly across the quiet ballroom so every single guest could hear him. "And an asset freeze mandate." Monica recoiled as if she had been physically struck. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow beneath the brilliant crystal chandelier. She stammered desperately, trying to construct a plausible lie, but her husband cut her off with a sharp and ruthless gesture. "Do not insult my intelligence," Monica Trey commanded, his tone dropping into a deadly quiet register that sent chills outward. "I know exactly what you did. I know you logged into my architectural firm's business accounts while I was sleeping. I know you deliberately forged my signature on 3 separate corporate withdrawal forms." Trey turned his head slightly, ensuring his voice carried toward the horrified high society crowd. He wanted the absolute destruction of her reputation to be a public spectacle. He pointed a steady finger down at his wife. "She forged my signature to steal $50,000 directly from my payroll accounts," he announced to the quiet room. "And she did it to secretly fund a luxury apartment lease and to buy a designer wardrobe for her brother's pregnant mistress." A collective and highly audible gasp swept right through the ballroom. The Preservation Society board members clutched their pearls, their eyes darting rapidly between Monica, the weeping Bradley, and the heavily pregnant Rebecca, standing near the ice sculpture. Rebecca instantly took a step backward, desperately trying to distance herself from the radioactive blast radius of the family destruction. But the damage was already done. Monica's jaw trembled uncontrollably. She looked frantically around the room, searching for a friendly face, a sympathetic ally, or any possible escape route from this absolute nightmare. She found absolutely nothing but intense judgment and disgust from the elite peers she worshipped. Trey leaned down, bringing his face mere inches from hers. "You bankrupted my company to protect his filthy affair," Trey whispered, though the microphone at the head table picked up every single syllable. "The police are waiting outside for you, Monica. Enjoy federal court." The reality of her impending incarceration finally broke Monica's mind. She let out a loud, piercing shriek and burst into hysterical and violent tears. She collapsed forward onto the table, sobbing uncontrollably over the caviar-stained divorce papers. Beatrice stood completely frozen, watching her daughter's life shatter into pieces right beside her ruined son. The matriarch was completely surrounded by the absolute wreckage of her family. The elite society women she had spent decades currying favor with were staring at her in abject horror, whispering behind their hands as the police sirens began wailing faintly in the distance. The opulent gala she had bragged about was now the site of a double corporate execution. Her legacy was turning into ash right before her eyes. The string of vintage Cartier diamonds around her neck felt like a tightening noose. She slowly lowered her raised hand, turning her head to look at me. The realization of my complete victory washed over her. I had not merely uncovered their secrets, I had weaponized them. I had systematically dismantled every single pillar of their fraudulent existence, wrapping their destruction in the very luxury they had tried to steal from me. Beatrice's lips parted, trembling as she struggled to find words capable of expressing the profound depth of her hatred. Her chest heaved with ragged breaths. The carefully maintained mask of a refined socialite completely dissolved, leaving only the desperate cornered animal underneath. She was nothing more than a parasite staring at the host, who had finally severed the connection. The crowd watched in morbid fascination as Beatrice completely unraveled. Every carefully laid plan, every stolen dollar, and every vicious lie had led her directly to this moment of absolute inescapable ruin. The magnificent ballroom with its Renaissance frescoes and crystal chandeliers served as the perfect ironic tomb for her arrogance. She looked at her weeping daughter, her trembling son, and finally her eyes locked onto mine. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. "You think you won?" Beatrice lunged forward, her expensive perfume mingling with the sour scent of desperate sweat. The destruction of her daughter Monica, happening merely feet away, had not humbled the matriarch. Instead, it had ignited a wild, feral delusion. Her perfectly manicured finger jabbed the air inches from my face. The words tore from her throat, raw and vicious, shattering the remaining illusion of her refined persona. "You think you won!" she shrieked, the sound slicing through the silence of the grand ballroom. "You think you can humiliate my family and just walk away?" Beatrice squared her shoulders, summoning a horrifying burst of arrogant energy. She looked at the horrified guests, her chest heaving desperately, trying to reclaim the superiority stripped away by Trey and Mr. Gallagher. "You might have ruined my son's career," she snarled, her voice gaining a manic edge. "You might have brought the police to this venue. But you are the one who is completely finished, Paige. You are the one who is homeless." I maintained my posture, keeping my face perfectly still, allowing her to dig her grave deeper. Beatrice mistook my silence for fear. A predatory grin stretched across her heavily powdered face. "Did you forget about the paperwork you signed yesterday?" Beatrice taunted, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You signed the primary deed of your house directly over to me. You authorized the transfer of the estate into my name to protect our assets. I own the roof over your head. I own the very ground you walk on. You will sleep on the cold streets tonight, you pathetic barren failure." The insult hung in the air, a toxic cloud. The Preservation Society board members gasped, backing further away from Beatrice. The sheer malice in her voice was so profound that even Mr. Gallagher, hardened by corporate warfare, looked visibly disgusted. But Beatrice was entirely blind to their revulsion. She was completely intoxicated by her perceived leverage. She pointed toward the grand double doors, her diamond necklace sparkling under the crystal chandeliers. "You will walk out of those doors with nothing," Beatrice mandated, her eyes flashing with vindictive glee. "You have no husband, no family, and no home. I will throw every piece of your cheap clothing onto the front lawn tonight. Rebecca will move into the master bedroom, and she will give my son the child that you were too defective to provide. You are a discarded empty shell, Paige. You have lost everything." The mention of the house acted like an electric shock to Bradley. He was kneeling on the floor, his bespoke velvet tuxedo wrinkled and stained with spilled champagne from the chaos. He blinked, shaking his head as if waking from a concussion. The terror that paralyzed him moments ago began to recede, replaced by a pathetic, desperate spark of hope. He realized his mother was right. They still had the multi-million-dollar estate. They still possessed the ultimate physical asset. Bradley scrambled to his feet, using the VIP table to pull himself up. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead with his trembling hand. He straightened his ruined bow tie, desperately trying to salvage a shred of his masculinity. He moved to stand beside his mother, physically aligning himself with her delusion of victory. He looked at the black leather album of his crimes, then looked up at me. The panic in his eyes was buried beneath a thick, repulsive layer of sneering arrogance. "You heard her, Paige," Bradley spat, his voice regaining a fraction of its former confidence. "You thought you were so clever pulling this little stunt tonight. You thought you could destroy me in front of my boss and walk away. But my mother is right. You handed over the keys to your own kingdom yesterday afternoon." He stepped closer, his chest puffed out in a ridiculous display of false bravado. He pointed a finger at me, mimicking his mother's aggressive posture. "I want you to leave this venue right now," Bradley commanded, his sneer deepening into a mask of entitlement. "I want you to hand over the house keys and walk away. You are done here. You are finished. I am going to live in that house with Rebecca, and we are going to raise our child in the home that you paid for. You are a temporary inconvenience that we have successfully eradicated from our future. Get out of here." The entire ballroom held its breath. The silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket pressing down on the hundreds of guests. Waiters stood frozen like statues. The string quartet remained motionless on their raised mahogany dais. Every single eye in the room was locked onto me, waiting to see how the broken, discarded, barren wife would respond to this ultimate devastating humiliation. I looked at Beatrice. I studied the manic, desperate triumph burning in her eyes, the absolute certainty that she had outsmarted me. I looked at Bradley. I observed the pathetic, fragile arrogance puffing up his chest, the cowardly reliance on his mother to save him from his own catastrophic failures. I looked at Rebecca, who was gently rubbing her pregnant stomach with a smug, expectant smile, genuinely believing she was about to inherit my entire life. I absorbed their insults. I absorbed their mockery. I felt the profound weight of their collective delusion pressing against my skin, and then I began to laugh. It started as a soft, rhythmic vibration in my chest. It was not a chuckle of defense, nor a giggle of madness. It was a slow, deep, resonant sound of absolute supreme victory. The sound finally escaped my lips, growing much louder and more powerful with every passing second. It echoed off the polished Italian marble floor. It bounced violently against the high, beautifully frescoed ceilings. It wrapped around the dripping crystal chandeliers and cascaded down over the silent, horrified crowd. It was a chilling, triumphant melody that completely and utterly shattered their extremely fragile illusion of control. My cold laughter cut off abruptly, slicing through the heavy atmosphere of the grand ballroom like a guillotine blade. The chilling resonance faded into an absolutely deafening silence. I lowered my chin and locked my eyes directly onto Beatrice. The arrogant smirk on her heavily powdered face began to falter, replaced by a sudden creeping uncertainty. She took a tiny, involuntary step backward as I stepped forward. My posture was perfectly straight, projecting the absolute authority of a woman who held every single string in this elaborate puppet show. Bradley shrank back against the linen tablecloth, his false bravado immediately evaporating under the sheer intensity of my gaze. Rebecca stood completely frozen nearby, her hands gripping her stomach as the horrifying realization dawned that my laughter was not born of shock or despair but of total unadulterated dominance. Did you genuinely believe a forensic accountant would sign away a multi-million-dollar asset to a parasite? I asked, my voice deadly calm, carrying effortlessly across the silent room. The question hung in the air, a verbal strike that made the surrounding high society guests gasp collectively. Did you honestly think, Beatrice, after spending my entire career dismantling corporate frauds and exposing financial predators, that I would blindly hand over the deed to my kingdom? You severely underestimated me. You confused my temporary silence with stupidity, and you mistook my strategic patience for weakness. You thought you were playing a masterful game of chess, but you were merely moving checkers on a board I owned, designed, and entirely controlled. I reached into my sleek evening clutch and slowly withdrew a single heavy sheet of paper. It was not a flimsy copy. It was a pristine, legally binding, certified document, stamped and embossed with the undeniable seal of a notary public. I held it up between my fingers, letting the crystal chandeliers illuminate the thick, undeniable ink of their signatures at the bottom. Bradley stared at the document, his eyes widening in pure horror as he recognized the thick, legal parchment he had gleefully signed just 24 hours ago in the comfort of my living room. He had been so completely and foolishly blinded by his immense greed that he had not even bothered to closely read the fine print. The house you are so proudly claiming to own is securely held by an ironclad premarital limited liability company. I stated, my voice ringing with absolute finality. I formed that corporate entity 3 years before I ever made the catastrophic mistake of meeting your son. That property is legally shielded from any marital asset division, and it is completely untouchable by anyone outside of my direct control. You could not claim a single brick of that house, even if you hired the most expensive legal team on the eastern seaboard. Beatrice's jaw dropped. The heavy vintage Cartier diamonds sparkled mockingly around her pale neck as her breath caught sharply in her tight throat. She looked at Bradley silently demanding an explanation, but her son was completely paralyzed, staring at the paper in my hand, as if it were a loaded weapon aimed directly at his chest. The papers you and Bradley eagerly signed yesterday were not a deed transfer. I continued, twisting the metaphorical knife with surgical precision. I watched the blood begin to drain from Beatrice's face as the crushing reality of my words started to penetrate her thick skull. You did not take ownership of my house. You did not secure a luxurious future for this pathetic excuse of a man and his pregnant mistress. What you actually signed with such overwhelming enthusiasm and staggering ignorance was a legally binding assumption of debt agreement. A loud collective murmur rippled through the gala guests. Mr. Gallagher, still standing by the VIP table, crossed his arms and offered a slow, appreciative nod. He recognized the ruthless efficiency of a flawlessly executed corporate trap. You legally assumed full unlimited personal liability for a $300,000 toxic business loan, I loudly announced, dropping the ultimate bombshell into the center of their shattered lives. It was a defaulted high-interest commercial note that I purchased for pennies on the dollar specifically for you. I bought that worthless debt, repackaged it, and placed it directly in front of you. You were so blinded by the prospect of stealing my home that you eagerly chained yourselves to an insurmountable mountain of financial ruin. You do not own a mansion, Beatrice. You own $300,000 of immediately payable, aggressively compounding corporate debt. And because you signed it jointly, the creditors will seize every single asset you possess. They will take your cars, your accounts, and your fake jewelry. You are completely, irreversibly bankrupt. Bradley let out a pathetic, suffocated wheeze. His knees buckled a second time and he slumped heavily against the side of the table, clutching his chest, as if he were experiencing a physical heart attack. He had traded his career, his marriage, and his freedom for absolutely nothing. He was facing federal prison for embezzlement, and now he was drowning in a six-figure debt that he could never possibly repay. Rebecca let out a sharp cry and turned away from him, backing into the crowd, desperately trying to sever her connection to the ruined man she had planned to exploit. Beatrice stood completely rigid. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking like a hollow, terrified ghost. Her mouth opened and closed silently, unable to form a single coherent word. Her entire world, her pristine social standing, her stolen wealth, and her arrogant delusions had been annihilated in less than 5 minutes. She had tried so hard to leave me homeless, but instead she had dug a dark financial grave so incredibly deep she would never climb out. Just as the absolute magnitude of her total destruction settled heavily over her shoulders, the shrill, piercing wail of police sirens began to echo loudly outside the heavy oak restaurant doors. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom did not simply open, they were violently thrust apart with an explosive force that rattled the delicate crystal chandeliers hanging above us. A highly synchronized, overwhelming wave of uniformed police officers and grim federal agents, wearing severe windbreakers, flooded the opulent space. The sophisticated high society crowd scattered instantly like a flock of startled birds, their expensive designer gowns and flawlessly tailored bespoke suits rustling frantically as they desperately cleared a wide, unobstructed path. The authorities moved with absolute, terrifying, and calculated purpose. They completely bypassed the extravagant buffet stations and the trembling musicians of the string quartet, heading directly for our elevated VIP table at the front of the room. The flashing red and blue lights from the dozens of cruisers parked outside cast frantic, chaotic, strobing shadows across the pristine Italian marble floor. The sudden invasion instantly transformed the elegant Preservation Society gala into a chaotic, terrifying crime scene. Panic rippled visibly through the wealthy guests as they realized this was not a simple misunderstanding. This was a targeted, perfectly orchestrated raid designed to completely dismantle a massive criminal operation. The officers formed a tight, inescapable perimeter around our table, their expressions carved from solid stone, ready to execute their assigned duties without a single shred of hesitation or mercy. The air in the room grew thick, heavy, and completely unbreathable. Two heavily armed, imposing officers flanked Bradley before he could even register their sudden approach. He was still slumped heavily against the white linen table, his breath coming in shallow, pathetic, terrified gasps. "Stand up right now, Mr. Wilson," the lead officer commanded, his deep voice completely devoid of any basic human sympathy. Bradley remained entirely paralyzed, his glassy eyes wide and staring blankly into the void. The officers did not wait for his voluntary compliance. They ruthlessly hauled him to his feet by the silken lapels of his absolutely ruined velvet tuxedo. "You are under arrest for grand corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand larceny," the officer recited, mechanically forcefully twisting Bradley's sweating arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic, unforgiving click of the steel handcuffs, ratcheting tightly around his wrists, echoed sharply across the quiet, breathless room. Bradley let out a pitiful, high-pitched, whimpering cry, but he offered absolutely no physical resistance whatsoever. He hung his head downward, entirely defeated, a completely broken man, publicly stripped of his manufactured arrogance and false bravado. Mr. Gallagher stood by and watched the brutal arrest, with extremely cold, unwavering satisfaction, nodding exactly once to the lead detective to confirm the target. The mighty regional logistics director had finally been reduced to a sniveling common criminal, completely exposed in front of his elite peers. Directly across the ruined table, Monica was still sobbing hysterically over her caviar-stained divorce papers. Two separate federal agents quickly approached her chair. Monica Wilson, a severely stern woman in a dark gray suit, announced loudly, flashing a bright silver badge in the dim light. "We have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest on multiple felony charges of identity theft, banking fraud, and corporate forgery." Monica screamed loudly, wildly, thrashing her arms as the strong agents forcibly pulled her up from the linen tablecloth. She looked desperately at Trey, openly begging him to stop them, desperately pleading for the mercy she had never once extended to me during our entire marriage. Trey simply adjusted his expensive gold cufflinks and coldly turned his back on her, signaling the absolute and permanent end of her privileged existence. The agents efficiently pinned her struggling wrists together, expertly securing the cold steel cuffs as she wailed uncontrollably. Her dark mascara was running rapidly down her pale face in thick, ugly rivers of pure panic. She desperately shrieked her innocence, screaming that it was all a terrible mistake, but her words fell entirely on deaf ears. The high society women who had previously idolized her now looked upon her writhing, pathetic form with intense, unapologetic disgust. Standing near the rapidly melting swan ice sculpture, Rebecca watched the simultaneous arrests with horrified, unblinking, panicked eyes. She instinctively took another cautious step backward, clearly intending to slip quietly into the dispersing, frightened crowd before she was noticed. "Excuse me," a third federal agent loudly intercepted her, stepping directly and forcefully into her designated path of escape. "You are Rebecca Sterling." It was absolutely not a question. She nodded slowly, her shaking hands instinctively clutching her pregnant stomach in a defensive posture. "I am an agent with the Internal Revenue Service," he stated calmly, his tone chillingly bureaucratic and devoid of any emotion. "You are hereby formally notified that the luxury villa currently registered in your specific name has been officially and permanently frozen. It is being seized immediately by the federal court as the direct proceeds of a massive corporate crime. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises completely." Rebecca let out a sudden, blood-curdling, agonizing shriek, her weak legs entirely giving way, as the terrifying reality of her sudden, inescapable homelessness finally struck her. Her glamorous future had just completely evaporated. Beatrice witnessed the complete, spectacular, and simultaneous annihilation of her entire bloodline. She watched her golden son violently dragged away as a common, pathetic thief. She watched her beloved daughter hauled off as a desperate federal fraudster. Her pristine, carefully cultivated reputation was thoroughly and irrevocably decimated, and a massive, inescapable, life-destroying debt now firmly crushed her delicate neck. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of the catastrophe completely overloaded her failing physical system. Beatrice violently clutched her chest, her breathing turning incredibly rapid and dangerously shallow. She collapsed heavily and ungracefully onto the polished Italian marble floor, her expensive vintage Cartier diamonds scraping harshly against the cold, unforgiving stone. No one rushed forward to offer her aid. The elite Preservation Society members simply stared down at her ruined, whimpering form in absolute chilling disgust. As perpetrators departed in handcuffs, the timid maitre d' presented the massive $15,000 gala bill. The maitre d' hesitated, his hands trembling violently as he held the silver tray, presenting the final $15,000 bill for the Preservation Society gala. The flashing red and blue lights from police cruisers parked outside illuminated his terrified face. He looked at the chaos unfolding around the VIP table, unsure of who was supposed to settle the tab now that the hosts were being read their Miranda rights. He took a hesitant step backward, intending to flee to the safety of the kitchen, but I raised my hand to stop him. I stepped over the shattered remnants of crystal champagne flutes and bypassed Beatrice, who was gasping for air on the marble floor, while two paramedics hastily unbuttoned her designer collar. I approached the trembling maitre d' with a serene, unbothered smile. I reached out and gently plucked the black leather folio from his silver tray. I opened it, glancing briefly at the astronomical total Beatrice had so arrogantly racked up just hours ago to impress a room full of people who now looked at her with pure disgust. I turned my attention to Bradley. The two federal agents were dragging him away from the table, his arms twisted painfully behind his back in cold steel handcuffs. His ruined velvet tuxedo was torn at the shoulder, and his face was a mask of paralyzing despair. I stepped directly into his path, forcing the armed officers to pause for a brief second. Bradley refused to meet my eyes, hanging his head in utter shame. I casually took the itemized bill from the leather folio and expertly folded it in half. With a swift, deliberate motion, I slid the thick paper directly into the breast pocket of Bradley's stained tuxedo jacket. I patted the pocket flat, smoothing out the wrinkled velvet with mocking affection. "My husband is paying," I announced loudly, my voice carrying crystal-clear authority to the trembling restaurant staff and the remaining guests. "Though you might want to run the card quickly before the bank freezes it." Bradley let out a muffled sob, his shoulders shaking as the officers ruthlessly shoved him forward toward the grand double doors. I stood my ground and watched the spectacular procession of utter defeat. Bradley went first, stumbling clumsily over his expensive leather shoes. Monica followed closely behind him, loudly screaming profanities at the federal agents who held her wrists in an iron grip, her mascara smudged into dark circles around her eyes. Rebecca trailed at the rear, sobbing hysterically as the IRS agents escorted her out, her hands desperately clutching her pregnant stomach as she realized she was walking out into the cold night with nothing but the clothes on her back. The paramedics finally managed to load a hyperventilating Beatrice onto a yellow gurney. They wheeled the fallen matriarch directly past me. She looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of raw terror and absolute realization. The magnificent, untouchable empire she had so ruthlessly built on lies, manipulation, and the destruction of others had burned to ashes in a matter of minutes. I did not offer her a single word of comfort. I simply watched her roll away into the flashing lights of the waiting ambulance, permanently erasing her from my reality. The grand ballroom slowly began to empty. The elite Preservation Society guests gathered their coats in hushed, terrified whispers, desperately eager to distance themselves from the catastrophic scandal that would dominate the morning headlines. Within minutes, the massive, opulent space was practically deserted, leaving behind a profound, echoing silence that felt incredibly pure. Trey stepped up beside me. He smoothly picked up two fresh, untouched crystal flutes from a nearby serving tray that had been abandoned in the chaos. He handed one to me, his dark eyes sparkling with profound respect and undeniable satisfaction. He looked around at the empty, shattered VIP table, the overturned chairs, and the spilled champagne soaking into the fine linen tablecloths. We stood together right in the very center of the total wreckage of our abusers' completely destroyed lives. "To absolute, undeniable justice," Trey said, raising his crystal flute in the dim romantic light of the chandeliers. I smiled, feeling a deep radiating warmth spread through my chest. "To taking out the trash," I replied smoothly. We clinked our champagne glasses together one last time. The delicate musical chime of the expensive crystal rang out like a final victory bell. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the vintage champagne, savoring the crisp, sweet taste of total freedom. We set our empty glasses down on the ruined table and turned our backs on the destruction. Trey offered me his arm and I took it. Together we walked down the grand center aisle of the ballroom, our footsteps echoing rhythmically on the polished marble. We pushed open the heavy oak double doors and walked out of the restaurant together into the crisp, cool American night. The freezing winter air hit my face, feeling incredibly refreshing and profoundly clean. The chaotic, flashing lights of the police cruisers were already fading in the distance, carrying the toxic remnants of my past far away from me forever. A sleek black car waits at the curb, its engine purring softly in the quiet street. The driver immediately stepped out and respectfully opened the heavy rear door for me. I turned to Trey, offering a genuine, unburdened smile of deep gratitude. We exchanged a final silent nod of absolute mutual respect before he turned and walked away toward his own waiting vehicle, his mission accomplished. I stepped into the warm, luxurious interior of the black car to take me to my newly rented luxurious penthouse. The driver gently closed the door, sealing me inside a quiet, secure, impenetrable fortress. As the powerful car smoothly pulled away from the curb and glided effortlessly down the dark street, I settled into the leather seat, gazing at the city lights. Complete financial freedom, zero toxic ties, and absolute sweet justice.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame makes me whole. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low, but the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.